Hello guys, and welcome to the Unit 5 review video, which is the Internet and World Wide Web. In this video, we are going to go through some typical past paper questions, just like what you would expect in your exam in May or October, where we will look at some typical mark scheme answers and discussing hints and tips which will help you remember these answers to make sure we get the most marks that we can. So let's get started. As we can see, we have a question on malware, where it states malware can be used to corrupt data on a computer. Tick one box to show which cybersecurity threat is not a type of malware. So which one is not a type of malware? We need to identify 3 types of malware where we will be left with the odd one out. So straight away, ransomware you should recognize as malware, a virus is also malware, and a worm is also malware, which means phishing is not a type of malware. And you should be aware that phishing comes in the form of an email. However, a phishing attack could lead to malware if you were to click on a suspicious link or download an attachment. But phishing itself is not a type of malware. Question B, identify one other example of malware other than the ones given in part A. So the ones that aren't mentioned, we have things like Trojan horse, we also have adware, and finally spyware are the cybersecurity threats that haven't been mentioned in 1A. And just a reminder guys, you have to know what all of these types of malware do and be able to explain why they are classed as a cybersecurity threat when it comes to internet safety. Question C, identify the type of software that is used to find and remove malware. And hopefully you can recognize that the software is called anti-malware. You would not get the mark for firewall in this question, as a firewall monitors the connections between the network, hoping to stop malware from entering your computer. However, once the malware enters your system, a firewall's job is to not find and remove it. It was to try and stop it in the first place. Anti-malware is the one that will find it and remove it. You could potentially get away with antivirus software, as this is just another terminology that you could use to describe anti-malware. Moving on to question 2. The table contains terms and descriptions about the internet. Complete the table with the missing terms and descriptions. So firstly, the collective name for all web pages available. This is known as the World Wide Web, and you should recognize www from any URL that you've typically typed in to get to a website. Next, we have a small text file stored by the web browser that can store personal data, and you should recognize this as a cookie, as we are constantly alerted if we allow websites to store personal data in the form of a cookie. A URL, or a uniform resource locator, is the address for a website, and just for clarity, it contains protocol, which is typically HTTPS, and the domain, for example, Amazon from amazon.com would be the domain. And then moving on to a web server stores websites which are requested by the user. So we type in a URL in order to access a website. We contact the web server to request the web page, and this is passed back to us so the website is visible within our browser. Next up, the language that is used to create a website. That includes tags such as head and body. This is simply HTML. And then the protocol that is used to request and send web pages, I've already said, which is HTTP. That goes here. Hypertext Transfer Protocol. So the P stands for protocol. And this is the protocol that's used in order to transfer web pages. Question 3, digital currency. And digital currency can be used to pay for products and services, and are often tracked using what we call a digital ledger. Give 2 other features of a digital currency. So what I always think of first when it comes to digital currency is that there is no central bank. So no central bank, or in other words, a decentralized system. You can also mention that it uses encryption. So encryption used for security. And you could also mention that it only exists electronically. There is no physical form, and any 2 of those would get you the 2 marks. The process that a digital ledger will use to track digital currency, this is known as blockchain. And then question 4 moves on to a DDoS attack, where we have to name 2 aims of a DDoS attack and then explain using a diagram the process of a DDoS attack. So there are a few reasons why DDoS attacks occur. The first one could be to test a system's security. It could be to affect the reputation of a company. It could be to hold the company ransom. So that would be a financial gain, as basically the attacker would threaten to keep the website offline until some kind of ransom is paid. You could also say revenge. For example, if someone leaves a company or is made redundant or fired, they might want to get revenge on a company. So that's why DDoS attacks are carried out. Next, we have to explain how using a diagram. So I'm going to draw a web server at the bottom. And as we've said, a web server stores a website. We have the third party at the top, or in other words, the attacker. The third party creates what's called a botnet, which is basically a virtual network of fake computers. And their only intention is to request access to the web server. So this is called your botnet. They are sending requests to the web server. So basically trying to gain access to it. And what will happen is this botnet will keep growing and growing until more and more requests come through. And what we call flood the system, where the web server fails due to the amount of requests, as it simply can't handle the amount of them. And anyone else outside of the network, so a typical user, when they try to gain access, the access is denied as the web server has failed due to the flooding of the system. So here, a legitimate or real request cannot be made as the system is down, which takes you back to these points here. And hopefully now you can see why these 4 things could be a purpose of carrying out a DDoS attack. Question 5, a manager at a company is concerned about a brute force attack on its employee user accounts. Describe how a brute force attack can be used to gain access to the employer user accounts. Well, a brute force attack will repeatedly guess passwords until the correct one is found. That will be 2 marks, 1 mark for this one and 1 mark for this one. And you can also say performed manually, so literally someone guessing passwords, or can be performed automatically using software. So software will be able to repeatedly guess passwords, going through common passwords, or just simply trying every combination of letters and numbers until the right password is found. And then in question B, we need to state why a brute force attack might take place. So obviously, if it's to gain access to accounts, first one, we could say to steal information or data. It could be to delete data, change data, or like with a DDoS attack, it could be to harm the reputation of the company. But I think by stealing information or deleting information, pretty obvious for the 2 marks available. We're next in question C. 3 types of malware that could be installed. And this goes back to the earlier question. Just a reminder, we have a virus, a worm, Trojan horse, spyware, adware, and ransomware. So just a reminder, malware is short for malicious software. So it's those 2 words combined. Hence why a brute force attack and a DDoS attack aren't types of malware because they aren't software as such. These 6 examples here are malicious software, and again, you need to be able to describe all 6 of them. Give 2 solutions that could be used to stop a brute force attack being successful. Well, I think the obvious one is to limit the amount of attempts for a password. You know that on most accounts these days, if you type your password incorrectly a number of times, you will be told that your password is locked or that you only have a certain amount of attempts left, which would easily stop a brute force attack, as it's very unlikely that someone could guess your password in a small number of attempts. So we can put a limit in place. We could also use strong passwords, which consist of symbols, uppercase and lowercase, numbers, and also a certain length. So at least 12 characters, for example. You could also say 2-step verification, as this will send an email to the user ensuring that it's them trying to log in. And you could also mention biometrics. As we know with most phones these days, we can unlock them with our face or with fingerprints, but fairly simple of how we stop a brute force attack with these 4 examples here. Question 6, a student uses the internet for schoolwork to research what is meant by farming. State the aim of farming. Well, again, it's to steal data. And then draw a diagram to represent the process of farming, where first and foremost, we have a computer or the user. Malware is installed to the computer, where the user then types in a web address or a URL. The user then thinks that they access the real website, when actually they've been redirected to a fake website, which imitates the real website in order to steal the information. So for example, you're on your computer, you type in the website for your online banking. The malware installed makes your computer go to a fake website, which looks just like the real online banking website that you think you're on. You're currently here. You type in your credentials to log in. The malware then passes this information back to the hacker. The user is completely unaware, as they thought they were on the real website, which they weren't. And at that point, the information has been stolen. And in reality, the user's bank account might have been hacked and money might have been stolen. So this is how farming works, which is different to phishing. Remember, phishing is in the form of an email. So please be aware of the differences between phishing and farming, but hopefully that diagram there makes complete sense for a farming attack. The student uses a web browser to access data. Explain the purpose of a web browser. Really simple, displays web pages by processing HTML. So always get HTML in there for these types of questions, because as you can see, there's 2 marks available, 1 for each of these points. Question D is functions of a web browser, and this states that storing cookies is a function of a web browser. We have to name 3 other functions where we could say store bookmarks or add favorites our favorite websites. Browsers also record a history of websites we've been on, so record a history. They also allow for multiple tabs to be open. You can also download files from the internet. They also provide you with an address bar to type in your URL. And then finally, some kind of navigation in the form of forward and back buttons. So quite a lot to choose from for the functions of a web browser, but pretty straightforward. And then next up is the difference between persistent and session cookies. So we need to explain the difference between session and persistent cookies. So first and foremost, session cookies are temporary, persistent are permanent, which is fairly easy to remember. The word permanent is very closely related to persistent, so just remember that if you are struggling. You can also mention that session cookies are stored in the RAM, persistent are stored in the hard drive, which again, temporary and permanent, you should link that back to Unit 3. Temporary also means that when the browser is closed, cookie is lost. However, here, the cookie is kept, or at least until the user deletes it. So you can manually delete cookies, but they are the differences and some typical examples of the two types. Persistent might be a saved password. So when you go to a website and your password's saved, this is saved permanently. A session cookie might be a basket for an online shop. So two typical examples of the two types there. And again, should be a simple 4 marks available. And finally, one of the trickiest questions that come up in Unit 5, which involves proxy servers and firewalls. We have to name 2 similarities between a proxy server and a firewall, and then 1 difference. So we'll start with the similarities. They both check incoming and outgoing traffic. So they both monitor traffic going in and out of a network. They also both block unauthorized access to a network, and it does this by keeping a blacklist or an allowed list of known connections. So if a connection flags up that could be harmful, it won't be allowed into the network. And again, proxy servers and firewalls both do this. A difference? Well, a proxy server hides IP addresses, a firewall doesn't. The proxy protects the server, the firewall protects the user. A proxy can also hide the internal network, whereas a firewall doesn't. And like I said, guys, proxy servers are one of the most complicated things to understand in this unit, but everything else is fairly simple to understand. Unit 5 is one of the smaller units, so if you need to go back and recap on some of the topics, then please do so. But other than that, guys, we have covered a good amount of typical exam-style questions that you can expect to see, where you should now be equipped of what to put when it comes to the Unit 5 questions in your exam. The blank documents and mark schemes are available in the link below. And of course, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel if you're finding it useful for your computer science course. And I'll hopefully see you in Unit 6, where we will cover the basics of AI. So thanks for watching, guys, and I'll see you soon.